Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. We're reading and discussing the book Codeword Barbelon, the second edition of a two-volume series, subtitled Antichrist is a Woman Alive and Well Again by P.D. Stewart, speaking about the latter-day rise of the Church of Antichrist, and we're positively identifying the biblical and historical Antichrist, and we're going to back up just a little bit for continuity purposes this morning at the last full paragraph on page 189 of the book. It's entitled The Great Papal Schism, 3 Heads, 1 Body. And if you were listening yesterday, obviously you know we're going to be talking about this great so-called one holy Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church, the one true Church of Jesus Christ, who had 3 divine and infallible popes all at the same time, all hurling anathemas and damnations at one another, calling one another Antichrist. And for the first time in papal history, they were right. And I don't mind making mockery of what God has obviously made a mockery of, simply to demonstrate to his people how blasphemous, how sinful, how decadent is this Church of Rome and the papacy. I mean, what could be better for the Church of Antichrist to have 3 popes all at once? I mean, if divinity and infallibility is important to the Roman Catholic Church, they shouldn't have fretted. They should have rejoiced. They had 3 of them all at the same time. Maybe that's the true Roman Catholic Trinity, 3 popes all at once, vying for 1 chair. It's kind of like musical chairs, only the music wasn't too pretty back then. Anyway, we'll read what the author says. He says, notwithstanding all the proofs to the contrary, the Catholic Church still claims that in reliance on ancient texts, they can prove that the Apostle Peter was the first pope and that papal succession and power originated with him. Well, what can we say about that? We'll respond by shedding some light on the true origin of the Pope's claims to the keys of Peter. But first, let's recall that from 904 AD to 963 AD, referred to in history as the reign of the prostitutes, the popes disgraced the papal throne. During that period, there were 11 popes from Pope Sergius III to John XII, which popes one writer describes as, quote, the 11 monsters of lewdness and profligacy, unquote, and as, quote, persons utterly indifferent to religion and poisoning Christendom by their bad example, unquote. Yes, so much for divinity and infallibility. And it says, then there was that papal schism, another one, from 1378 to 1417, quote, which for so long a space of time perplexed the true believers by the inexplicable phenomenon of the coexistence of 2 supreme and infallible pontifical heads of the Church, each proscribing his competitor and fulminating the terrors of damnation against the adherents of the other, unquote. From 1378 to 1409, there was Pope Clement VII and Pope Urban VI, succeeded respectively by Pope Benedict XIII at Avignon, France. Yeah, that's right. There was a makeshift Vatican set up in Avignon, France, because of the infighting over the papal chair in St. Peter's. And there was also Pope Gregory XII at Rome, each predecessor and then their successor ruling at the time. But who was the real pope? That's the question. That's the $64,000 question. Who was the real pope? The King of France and the French clergy recognized Pope Clement the Seventh and then Benedict XIII, but the English and the Italians recognized Pope Urban VI and his successor, Gregory XII, in Rome. The situation got even worse. In 1409, 25th March, the Council of Pisa deposed both popes. That's right, they set him off the chair, Peter, so-called, and elected a new pope, Alexander V. So much for divinity and infallibility, right? They kicked two popes out for fighting over the so-called chair of Peter, and they elected a new one, Alexander V. And it says, but their actions did not achieve general approval. And so, from 1409 to 1417, there were three popes, not just two, until finally the Council of Constance in 1414 to 1418 secured the resignation of one of the popes and deposed the other two, and a new pope, a new one, Martin V, whose real name was Odo Colonna, was installed on November 11, 1417. Thus, from 1378 to 1417, no one knew who was the real pope. And I'm telling you, this comedy of errors is divinely inspired simply to comfort God's people about the truth, about these blasphemous claims of the papacy to being divine and infallible, and about this church that claims to be the one holy Roman Catholic and Apostolic. It is the Church of Antichrist. And God has shown us in spades, has lifted the skirt of the whore in Rome and shown us her nakedness. None of us need fear Rome. Now, and so says the Encyclopedia Britannica, for, quote, a period of 38 years, Christian Europe was scandalized by the contentions of two rival popes, and one holding his court in Rome, the other at Geneva, each hurling anathemas, excommunication, and the foulest accusations of the other, unquote. So disgusted was the Protestant reformer John Wycliffe with the dispute of these popes that he compared them to, quote, three, depending on which period you're talking, whether 2 or 3 dogs snarling over a bone, unquote. A metaphor, nay, a fact, which in itself affords significant proof of the fallacy of their claim to infallibility and inerrancy. This situation has always been a great scandal, difficult to reconcile by the Catholic historians. Do tell. And P.D. Stewart can't help but rub it in a little bit. He says, explain that, infallibilists, you demons who hold to this so-called papal infallibility. How do you explain this? Anyway, he continues, he says, notwithstanding 2 centuries before the Great Schism, quote, Pope Gregory VII proclaimed the perfection of the Roman Church, unquote, and declared that, quote, it had never erred, could never err, nor would it ever err, unquote, which is still the position of the Roman Catholic Church to this day. Reader, it is a rare thing, but on this occasion I must agree with Pope Urban, says the author, in his memorable bull entitled Unum Sanctum Ecclesiam, dated the 18th of November of 1302, when he said, the true Church of God, quote, could have but one head. A 2-headed church would be a monstrosity, unquote. Yea, says the author, more. I say a 3-headed church is an utter absurdity, which absurdity existed for 39 long years in the Roman Catholic Church. How fitting, then, that the Bible says Rome is a seven-headed monster. See Revelation chapter 17 and verse 3. And here's an artistic rendition, sort of a cartoonish mockery of this so-called divine and infallible papacy, when there were three simultaneously fighting over divinity and infallibility. And the caption under this apparent war taking place in heaven, it says, Pope Urban VI and Pope Clement VII each excommunicated the other, and along with their supporters, each called the other anti-pope. Now, if you understand, this is just the Roman Catholic Church's way of saying Antichrist, because Pope is the replacement of Christ, remember? So when they hurl an anathema anti-Pope, it literally means Antichrist. The caption continues, it says, such fightings were not unlike that started by the devil in heaven, who for his own attempt at usurpation in that place was cast out to earth, from where he continues his strivings, and I will just simply add, through the papacy. God is simply showing us the rebellion that Satan initiated in heaven, trying to usurp God's throne, trying to raise his throne above the stars of God, to sit upon the mount of the congregation, you know it by now, to be like the Most High. And here we have the same rebellion taking place, only this time in the form of the papacy, who received his power and seat and great authority from the dragon. Now, is it any wonder that the papacy should show direct lineage to Satan as the seed of Satan on the earth? If the papacy be Antichrist, would there not be this similarity? God is simply confirming to us. Now, one wonders what St. Peter would think of those popes as successors to, quote-unquote, his throne. Obviously, the author understands that Peter doesn't have a throne on the earth, that this whole idea that the popes are successors of Peter we'll deal with thoroughly in this book. It says, who, asked J.J. Overbeck, is able to get out of this maze of contradictions? The answer? A three-headed church. If you can imagine anything with three heads trying to decide which way to turn in a maze such as the Roman Catholic Church has surrounded itself with all its contradictions. Which way do we go? Which way do we go? And it's an aimless church. It's not the Church of Christ. Now, under the subtitle, Pope as Mediator, the author writes, not content with the liturgical trash and ritual graffiti she has heaped upon the Christian religion, quote, the people were taught that they must look to the Pope as their mediator, that the Pope was their earthly mediator, and that none could approach God except through him. And further, that he stood in the place of God to them, and was therefore to be implicitly obeyed. A deviation from his requirements was sufficient cause for the severest punishment to be visited upon the bodies and the souls of the offenders. Thus the minds of the people were turned away from God, unquote, and unto the Pope. By this means the Pope stole the hearts of the people, alienating their affections from him, while telling them that by loving and obeying the former and his army of priests, they were showing their love for the latter. What a dreadful seduction. But while the popes claim to be God's sole representative on earth, and even to be very God, Yet under their watchful eyes, and in many cases by their leading examples, fraud, avarice, and profligacy prevailed in the Roman Catholic Church. The popes and prelates shrank from no crime by which they could gain wealth and further aggrandize their position. The palaces of popes and prelates were scenes of the vilest debauchery. Some of the reigning pontiffs were guilty of crimes so revolting that secular rulers endeavored to depose these dignities from the church as monsters too vile to be tolerated. For centuries, Europe had made no progress in learning, arts, or civilization. A moral and intellectual paralysis had fallen upon Christendom, unquote, under the cloud of the papal power, close quotes. As I mentioned in Book 1, says the author, anyone who is aware of church history will know that the corruptions in the Roman Catholic Church went all the way to the top. Scores of popes have been proved guilty of the grossest crimes, incest and adultery being the least, and murder not being uncommon. I could give a long history of the crimes and vices with which the popes of Rome disgraced the so-called chair of Peter, but I spare you. The reader can find details by referring to Book 1. But if the reader will permit, I will mention some details of one pope, John the 23rd, against whom a church general council called by Emperor Sigismund and Constance in 1414, quote, drew up a long indictment, unquote, which ran to 54 articles, 54 charges, including, says the secretary, Thierry Deneum, all the mortal sins and multitude of abominable acts not to be named, unquote. In other words, his crimes were so diabolical that they couldn't bring themselves to even name them. And Pope John the 23rd, quote, was charged with rape, adultery, incest, sodomy, and the murder of Pope Alexander V. After a brief trial, he was found guilty and imprisoned, unquote. The acts of this celebrated council were published in 6 volumes, folio, by Herrn van der Hart in Frankfurt in 1700 A.D. And now the author interjects some artistic renditions of the Egyptian and Babylonian roots of the Roman Catholic Church, even including a photograph of a more youthful Pope John Paul II doing his 666 imitation. I'll try to describe it. Making the OK sign with both hands and putting them over his eyes as though they were glasses. That's an esoteric representation of 666, the Antichrist. And if you'll notice, the index finger and the thumb make a circle, and which is the round part of the number 6, and then each finger, the middle finger, the ring finger, and the little finger, each represent the curved upper portion of the number 6. So there you have 666, one on each hand. Now the author continues under the subtitle Pater, Not Peter. It says the following is the text of an address that the Holy Father Benedict XVI gave from the Vatican on the 17th of January, 2008. Quote, listen to this. The Pope is, first of all, the Bishop of Rome, and as such, in virtue of apostolic succession from the Apostle Peter, he has episcopal authority in regard to the entire Catholic Church, and by Catholic you must understand he means all of Christendom. It says the word bishop episkopos, which in its immediate meaning refers to supervision. He is the one, that is, the Pope is the one, from an elevated point of observation, surveys the whole landscape, making sure to keep the flock and on the right, keep the flock together and on the right path, unquote. So that's Pope Benedict XVI, Antichrist Benedict XVI, declaring his lordship over all of Christendom, not just the Catholic Church. Because when they say the Catholic Church, they mean the universal church. They mean everyone on the earth. Now, reader, says the author, I will be brief. Without intending to enter into any discussion on this point, I would only remark that this statement recalls to mind that the French also have a word, Peter, to fart, which word I find hard to imagine is not somehow related to the papal claim of apostolic succession and episcopal authority. Enough said. A picture will say the rest. And here we have a depiction of one historical pope with his papal tiara and all of his vestments, seated, exposing his bared foot for kissing. And some might find P.D. Stewart's frankness of expression offensive. How much more offensive can be the Antichrist? The term is appropriate as far as I'm concerned. Now, in chapter 29 of the book is entitled Antichrist, the Church Here in Babylon. And this is where I have a bit of a controversy with this author. I won't belabor the point, but I believe the Apostle Peter was the apostle to the Gentile, or to the Jews, and part of his mission included the ancient land of Babylon, and that's where he was witnessing to Jews. I do not dispute that Babylon is code word for Rome, not at all. But I don't believe the Apostle Peter ever set foot in Rome. Finally, we understand from the Scriptures that when Paul went to Rome, the first thing he did was confront the leaders of the Jews in Rome, and they replied to him that they'd never even so much as heard the gospel before, and that wherever it was spoken of, it was evil spoken of. So it's very highly unlikely that Peter had ever been in Rome, because had he been in Rome, he would have well educated those Jews about the gospel and about Jesus Christ. But they didn't know anything about it. And there are many, many other scriptural proofs that Peter had never cast a shadow in Rome. I like to say, tongue-in-cheek, had Peter ever gone to Rome, he could have never found the bathroom because he'd never been there. And so I'll just leave it at that, and I'll read what the author offers, understanding that his primary emphasis is that Roman Catholic historians admit Babylon, the word Babylon, is key, and it is code word for Rome. They openly admit this. And again, the title of this chapter, chapter 29, Antichrist, the Church Here in Babylon. It begins with a quote, "Come hither, and I will show thee the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. And I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And upon her forehead was written, Mystery, Babylon." Revelation chapter 17, verses 1, 3, and 5. The reader continues, he says, "My reader may not yet be convinced that the Roman Catholic system is indeed the system of Antichrist. For there are those Jesuit-educated authors who will tell us that the beast upon which this woman sits was the prophet Muhammad, and that the 7 hills upon which the woman sits signify the 7 successive Turkish empires. But as I will show in the next 10 pages, these are but foolish observations. The woman who sits on the beast, the remnants of the old Roman Empire, is the new Rome, the Papacy, quote, that proud new startup Romish church, unquote, says Bullinger. How do we know that Mystery Babylon refers to a church? Was there ever a church located in a place called Babylon? We learn from the King James Version of the Bible, the first epistle of Peter, chapter 5, verse 13, that the Apostle Peter was writing that letter from a place he termed figuratively Babylon. Quote, the church here in Babylon salutes you, and so doth Marcus. Greet ye one another with a kiss of charity. Peace be with you all that are in Christ Jesus. Amen. So Peter was writing from a place he called Babylon. What place was that? Catholic theologian Cardinal Gibbons of Baltimore tells us the location of the place from which Peter wrote. Gibbons says, quote, intrinsic evidence of St. Peter's first epistle, that is 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 13 specifically, and the testimony of his immediate successors all concur in fixing the see, or the bishopric, of Peter in Rome. Babylon, from which Peter addresses his first epistle, is understood to refer to Rome. The word Babylon being symbolic of the corruption then prevailing in the city of the Caesars. Irenaeus, Origen, St. Jerome, Eusebius, and great historians and other eminent writers testify to St. Peter's residence in Rome. No ancient ecclesiastic writer has ever contradicted the statement. Unquote. Why was the city of the Caesars symbolically called Babylon? Cardinal Gibbons again says, quote, the penetration of the religion of Babylon became so general and well known that Rome was called the New Babylon, unquote. Reader, there you have it. The city of Rome, where now sits the Vatican and the Pope, according to the venerable Cardinal Gibbons, a Roman Catholic cardinal, is called the New Babylon. And Revelation chapter 17, verse 4 through 6, fingers heard thus, quote, the woman was seated on the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns, and arrayed in purple and scarlet color, had a name written on her forehead, Mystery, Babylon the Great, unquote. Let us note at once that scarlet was the official color of the court of ancient Babylon. Here's the biblical proof, quote, then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet, and put a chain of gold about his neck, and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom, unquote. Daniel chapter 6, verse 39. So look at the Babylonian roots. I mean, it's almost, if you can just picture this in your mind, they clothed him with scarlet-colored robes, and they put a gold chain around his neck. And the Bible doesn't say anything about it, but I tell you, when you understand the Babylonian roots of the Roman Catholic Church, it's hard to resist the temptation to say that Belshazzar was making Daniel a cardinal. Anyway, it says, now, if, as we saw, a woman in prophetic scripture is symbolic of a church, see Jeremiah chapter 6 and verse 2, and if Cardinal Gibbons is correct about Babylon being symbolic of the city of Rome, then the woman that sits on the beast must be the church that has her seat and headquarters at Rome. But we may not pause here. I turn again to another author, the respected Carl Keating, a faithful Roman Catholic. Keating writes, quote, Babylon is code word for Rome. It is used that way 6 times in the last book of the Bible, and in extra biblical works such as Siblings, Oracles, number 5, 159F, and the Apocalypse of Baruch 2:1, Eusebius Pamphilus, writing about 303 AD, noted that Peter's first epistle was composed at Rome itself, and that he himself indicates this, referring to the city figuratively as Babylon. These references cannot be to the one-time capital of the Babylonian Empire. That Babylon had been reduced to an inconsequential status by the march of years, military defeat, and political subjugation. It was no longer a quote-unquote great city. The only truly great city in the New Testament was Rome, unquote. Reader, I beg leave to dissect these statements and to draw a conclusion. That the city of Rome here is meant. In 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 13, the ablest champions of Catholicism admit even that most respected Jesuit doctor, Cardinal Robert Bellarmine, confesses this to be so. Quote, St. John in the Apocalypse calls Rome Babylon, for no other city except Rome reigned in his age over the kings of the earth, and it is well known that Rome is seated upon 7 hills, unquote. We have already had a whole chapter about the woman sitting upon the 7 hills or mountains, and here Cardinal Bellarmine confirms the same is the city of Rome, which city he calls Babylon. At first point, all the evidence comes in which I laid before you in previous chapters, all confirming that the city on the 7 hills, the city Revelation calls Babylon in the apocalyptic visions, is indeed the city of Rome, the Pope's seat and the headquarters of the Roman Catholic Church. But yet more proof is available to show that the Pope's kingdom is that of Antichrist. In Isaiah chapter 14, verses 4 and 12, Satan is called the king of Babylon. This is significant because anyone who's familiar with the Bible will know that it often refers to persons and places using metaphoric names. For example, Satan is addressed as the prince of Tyrus in Ezekiel chapter 28. If, therefore, Rome was called Babylon in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 13, as confirmed by the ablest of Roman Catholic scholars, and Satan is called the kingdom of Babylon, or the king of Babylon in Isaiah chapter 14, then Babylon must be where he has his kingdom or seat. For instance, the place from which he exercises his power on earth. Quote, I know thy works, says the angel of Revelation, and where thou dwellest, even where Satan's seat is, where Satan dwelleth. Revelation chapter 2, verse 13. But there's yet another matter I wish to bring to the attention of my readers. Consider this. Consider this. Revelation chapter 11 refers to the city of Babylon as, quote, the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, unquote. Revelation chapter 11, verse 8. What does this mean? The introduction of the word spiritually settles the symbolic nature of the narrative as far as the two names are concerned. The names Sodom and Egypt are being used as in a spiritual sense, and so are to be understood as metaphoric only and not literal. That is clear. But the city is literal. Only it is referred to by its symbolic names. What literal city is here intended? What city is being denoted Sodom and Egypt in a metaphoric sense? Despite the phrase, quote, where also our Lord was crucified, unquote, it is not the city of Jerusalem being referred to, for we are expressly told that the two names used in the passage are spiritual or metaphoric. The author, John, was seeking to encrypt his message. but to identify the place beyond mistake for those only who would seek to decode the message, it is further described in the same verse as, quote, the great city, unquote, which is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt, unquote. So the city is literal, while the names given to it are spiritual or metaphoric. Reader, the great city mentioned for the first time in this mystery passage is Babylon the Great. For only Babylon is called that great city, the great city, and this great city. See Revelation chapter 11, verse 8, 14, verse 8, 16, verse 19, 17, verse 18, 18, verse 10, 16, 18, 19, and 21. These terms have never been applied to Jerusalem or any other place for that matter in the book of Revelation. Revelation chapter 18 verse 10 refers to Babylon by the expression, quote, alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come, unquote. And to confirm the use of the words, that great city, was no happenstance or fluke. Verse 21 of the same chapter repeats the expression, that great city. Quote, thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down, unquote. And Revelation chapter 17 verse 18 confirms that Babylon is not only figuratively a woman, but also that great city. Quote, and the woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth, unquote. Notice, reader, only Babylon is referred to as that great city. You can read the other passages in Revelation 14 and 16 yourself. But why is this that great city also metaphorically called Sodom and Egypt? I'll deal with Egypt first. In order to understand the allusion to Egypt, we must ask, what was the spiritual condition of Egypt? It was idolatry, the worship of the dead. Doesn't Rome worship the dead? And the worship of images. Doesn't Rome worship images? Said one author, quote, the peculiar sin of Egypt was an extreme propensity to idolatry, to the worship of departed spirits represented by visible forms or emblems, and a slavish superstition accompanied by an addiction to sorcery and similar practices. And I'll just interject, could he not also been speaking about Rome? So the great city is spiritually likened unto Egypt because of its idolatries. But Egypt was also, and this is key, Egypt was also an oppressing power. Just read the book of Exodus, chapter 5, verse 5 through 10. So, too, Rome is called Egypt on account of its oppression of God's people. See later chapters here in this book on the Inquisition. Next, we ask, what was the spiritual condition of Sodom? What was the peculiar characteristic of Sodom? The iniquity of Sodom was homosexual activity, sodomy. This was the preeminent sin of that city. Likewise today, Roman Catholicism and its capital city, Rome, like a spiritual Sodom, has a sodomitish character. It is a church full of homosexual priests practicing ritual sodomy. And the author includes a very, very important note here. He says, according to the Catholic News Agency, studies have shown that pedophilia is usually associated with homosexual activity. Dr. Richard Fitzgibbons, a United States psychiatrist and a member of NARTH's Scientific Advisory Committee, with experience in treating Catholic priests involved in pedophilic activities, says, quote, and listen to this, every priest whom I treated who was involved with children sexually had previously been involved in adult homosexual relationships, unquote. And this confirms what I've always said on this program, that the sodomy of Rome is a direct cause and effect relationship because of its idolatry. That was the primary sin of Sodom. Sodomy was a result of that. It was male on male adult homosexuality, and the only reason pedophilia is practiced by these priests, or one of the reasons why pedophilia is practiced by these priests, is because they don't have to worry about extortion or blackmail. They can threaten these little boys. They can threaten their parents with eternal damnation. Remember, they pose themselves as other Christs, alter Christos, to these little boys. They're to be worshipped as if they were Christ. And it's not hard to suppress this diabolical activity between the priests and these little boys if these little boys view these priests as Christ and have the power of excommunication and eternal damnation. Pedophilia is just an outgrowth of homosexuality, which is just an outgrowth of idolatry. See Romans chapter 1. Now, continuing, the author says, not surprisingly, in our modern times, the most distinguished reason for the Catholic Church's preeminence in the media is the epidemic of sodomy of little boys and girls by the Catholic priests. There's your Sodom in Egypt. Sodomy and oppression. The worship of the dead. The worship of images. It's not talking about Jerusalem. It's talking about Rome. He's going to talk now about the French Revolution. He says, I wish to add this addendum to the foregoing, which is that even the horrible blasphemies and brutality attending the French Revolution were the result of and a reaction to the false and morally corrupting doctrines of the Roman Catholic Church. So says the great historian and judge Lord Acton, a Catholic peer of the House of Lords. It was the result of the attempted suppression of the Jesuits in 1773, which resulted in chaotic and fearful scenes of revolution. Almost immediately after the suppression of the Jesuit order, the French Revolution burst upon mankind, which, according to Lord Acton, was not by chance or due to popular frenzy, but by design and calculating organization. The managers remained studiously concealed and masked, and there's no doubt about their presence from the very first. They had been active in the riots in Paris, and they were again active in the provincial rising. They entered into compacts and combinations, unquote. And here this comes, and his full name is John Emmerich Edward Dahlberg Acton. We call him Lord Acton. He was the first Baron Acton, and his work was entitled Lectures on the French Revolution. He simply said that the French Revolution resulted from the abominations of the Roman Catholic Church and the suppression of the Jesuits. For what purpose? We'll talk about that some other time. Sir Winston Churchill confirms this view when he said, quote, from the days of Spartacus, which was just a code name for Adam Weishaupt, from the days of Spartacus, Weishaupt, Karl Marx, Trotsky, Rosa Luxemburg, and Emma Goldman, this world conspiracy has been steadily growing. This conspiracy played a definite, recognizable role in the tragedy of the French Revolution, unquote. Details can be found in chapter 26 of Book 1. Thus, spiritually, allegorically, or figuratively, this city, Rome and its church, is called Sodom and Egypt. Sodom on account of its moral corruptions, and Egypt on account of its worship of idols and its oppressive history. Who but a very stubborn person would dispute any of this when Catholic scholars such as Cardinal Bellarmine and Gibbons and Professor Carl Keating all say, quote, Babylon is code word for Rome, unquote. He continues, he says, Reader, I will now proceed to show that the prophecies concerning Antichrist fit the Church of Rome like Chubb's keys fit their locks. Chapter 33, beginning now on page 201, is entitled The Number of Antichrist. And many people are going to find this very, very interesting if you've never heard it before. He says, we know, of course, that the number of Antichrist is 666. But can it be proved that this number is also that of the Pope's kingdom? Revelation chapter 13, verse 18 states, quote, Here is wisdom. Let him who hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666, unquote. Now, note carefully, reader, the man is not the Antichrist, for we are told to count the number of the beast. The beast is the Antichrist proper. But in order to count or work out this number, we are told to look for it in the number of a man. Quote, for it is the number of a man, unquote. Thus, to count or discover the number of the beast, we must find a man who has a number that adds to 666. This we shall shortly undertake to do. But first, let me observe that the beast of Revelation chapter 13 is the same beast referred to in Revelation chapter 17. This is evident by the fact that both beasts have 7 heads and 10 horns and names of blasphemy. See Revelation 13:1 and Revelation 17:3. Revelation 17, verse 3 says the woman, Mystery Babylon, is seated upon a scarlet-colored beast full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And I see we've come up to the end of our time. Kind of an awkward place to stop, but we'll pick up on the broadcast tomorrow.